This video is brought to you by PrizePicks. So one thing I've noticed about this draft cycle is one, like every draft cycle that's ever happened in Cleveland, whether we're picking all the way back in the third round for our first selection or if we have a first round pick, there are people who act like there's only one good way things can roll out. And that's just not true, right? Going into last year's draft, which is one of the strongest drafts in Cleveland Browns history. It's also the strongest draft of last season of any team from last year, right? The Browns ended up with the Defensive Rookie of the Year. Well, the reality is that the way that draft laid out, not a lot of people had on their bingo card, right? The Browns trading back to 5, picking up an extra first, drafting a defensive tackle, number 5, then swinging back around at pick 33 and getting a linebacker, and then taking Quincy Judkins when Travion Henderson's still on the board. But it ended up working out, right? Like that ended up being a really, really good draft for the Cleveland Browns. They ended up walking out of there with some really, really good players. See, we get this idea, or we get locked into what we think the Browns should do when it comes to the draft. And then we trick ourselves into believing that that's the only way it can go right. For this year, have been staying away from the strong opinions about what the Browns should do. Because one, there's not a player that's so damn good that I have to sit here and be like, that's the only pick that they should go with. None of the wide receivers are up to that level. And I like Monroe Freeling. He's probably the closest player that gets to that point for me. But even then, I can understand if the Browns want to go a different direction. That being said, I'm very flexible with what the Browns could do and how that could be successful. One, because they did do a really good job last year. But two, because I understand that this is a draft where this can break a lot of different ways. And that means that there's a lot of different paths to success. Now, the one thing that we all agree on is that the Browns need to improve the offense. And here's the thing about improving the offense. There's more than one way to do it. Whenever I mention that the Browns need to go and they draft the offensive tackle early in the draft, people get mad and act like I'm ignoring the offense when I suggest that they take a offensive tackle early in the draft, because he's not a skill player, right? I saw Tony Rizzo on the radio having one of his trademark temper tantrums about wanting the Browns to get a playmaker on offense. And here's the part of all of this that it just sounds crazy. It sounds crazy to me. One, we thought last year that Quincy Judkins was a playmaker, right? Harold Fannin, he was a playmaker. A year ago, we thought that Jerry Jeudy was a playmaker. The Browns' offense and their issues over the last couple of years has not been about the lack of playmakers at the skill position. It's been about the lack of playmakers on the offensive line. And see, that's another thing that I don't really understand in 2026 that we're still having this conversation. People seem to have the idea that only wide receivers, only quarterbacks, only running backs, only those skilled players, right, tight ends, can be playmakers. But an offensive lineman, people do not believe can be a playmaker. This is especially egregious to me because we witnessed Joe Thomas's entire career. And some people will say, well, yeah, Joe Thomas was here, but we didn't win any championships. Nobody is saying having a franchise left tackle is equivalent to having a franchise quarterback. Nobody is saying having a franchise left tackle makes you immune to having shitty offenses. But we have seen Joe Thomas make blocks that turn 5-yard runs into 40-yard runs. We have seen Joe Thomas hold up in pass protection so long that it makes it easy for a quarterback to get a long throw. Like, we've seen this. We know the impact of a great offensive lineman. And we also know the impact of having a great offensive line. The Cleveland Browns in 2020 were purely fueled by that offensive line. If you look at what they had in the receiving department, it wasn't very impressive. Odell Beckham was in and out that entire era of the Cleveland Browns, but specifically in 2020, I believe he got hurt pretty early on in the season. That's when the whole "is Baker Mayfield better without Odell" narrative started. And then we had what was left of Jarvis Landry, and that was pretty much it. Like Rashad Higgins, who was out the league a couple years after 2020, like not a great wide receiver room. But what carried that team in 2020 past the Pittsburgh Steelers in the first round, what carried them almost to a conference championship game, wasn't this amazing wide receiver room. It was the fact that the Browns were dominant on the line of scrimmage at the offensive line. Everybody wants to have smash mouth Cleveland Browns football. Nobody wants to actually draft the lineman when you got to do it. We'll talk about this more, but first I got to thank my sponsor, PrizePicks. Hey, let me talk to you about my sponsor for this year, PrizePicks. It's a fun way to win cash while you're watching your favorite teams. Forget complex betting rules. Their app is designed to be incredibly easy to use. Just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. Speaking of, here are my picks for this upcoming NFL season. They have Myles Garrett at 14 sacks here. I think he will get more than 14 sacks. Joe Burrow at 3,875 passing yards. I think he'll be a 4,000-yard passer. I'm going to go with more. They have Derrick Henry at 1,224 yards. I'm going to go less than that. Check to see if PrizePicks is available in your state. You can follow me on the app at KWEN_C to see all of my lineups. Download the PrizePicks app today. Play $5 and get $50 in lineups when you download the app using the link in the description. Fixing the offensive line is a huge part in fixing the offense. People get so fixated about the passing game when it comes to offense that they think that that's the only way to make offense better. But if you look at how the Browns roster is lined up, if you look at where the Browns' current strengths are on the team, this is a team that should be investing in building up the foundation of what they have already in the run game. They have a bell cow back already in Quincy Judkins. I think they have a nice change of pace back in Dylan Sampson. You could even say Rocket Sanders is a fine number 3 running back, but the Browns could find another guy in UDFA this year to be a number 3 running back. It's really not that big of a deal, right? So the Browns have a good running back room. And they did some improvements on the offensive line, but they still need a tackle. And if the Browns can get a tackle, like a Monroe Freeling, who is a athletic enough guy to climb to the second level and pull and really take that run game to the next level, that's going to massively improve the offense. If the Browns have a run game that can actually hold up versus heavy boxes, because that's the thing about having a great offensive line. It does not matter if teams are stacking the box or not. You're still able to be productive in the run game. Then all of a sudden, it becomes a lot easier for the Browns offense to function in other areas where they weren't as strong at, right? Are the Browns really that terrible when it comes to their receiving options? I mean, they have Jerry Jeudy, who was a 1,000-yard receiver not too long ago. They have Harold Fannin, who definitely proved himself to be a playmaker at the tight end position. We all think Dylan Sampson needs to be unlocked more as his potential as a receiver as well as a running back. Isaiah Bond is somebody they had a top 75 grade on, so like a third round grade on, that they're clearly not going to give up on this quickly. Cedric Tillman has been inconsistent, but when he's been out there, he's been able to be productive and make some splash plays. No, it's not the kind of wide receiver room that's going to blow anybody away. No, it's not the kind of wide receiver room that's immune to an addition here. And that, but when I look at the Browns wide receiver room and I look at their tackle room, especially for left tackle, I think left tackle is in more need than wide receiver. And I've seen offenses be fixed because they got a great tackle and they fixed their offensive line. I haven't seen many offenses get fixed because they decided to throw wide receivers at the problem. And that's not to say that I'm against drafting a wide receiver. See, what's lost in a lot of this conversation when we're talking about pick six is the Browns have other picks. The Browns could easily address wide receiver at 24. They could easily address wide receiver at 39. Now, some people say, hey, you could address tackle at 24 and 39. Well, you're compromising more at 24 and 39 at tackle because you're taking guys who are traditionally right tackles and have not played left tackle before, right? Blake Miller is a right tackle. Now, you could try to flip Blake Miller, and maybe the Browns are in on that. But the gap between Caleb Lomu and Monroe Freeling is large. It's a massive gap there. If you want to know what the gap is between Monroe Freeling and Caleb Lomu, go watch Caleb Lomu play against Texas Tech. And then come back to this video and tell me that's the same thing as Monroe Freeling. It's clearly not. They're very different. And I think the evaluation for those players are very different. But the gap between the top three wide receivers in this class and then the next class, the next group of wide receivers, it's not as big, right? You know, Carnell Tate's a solid prospect. Mekhi Lemon, I like him a lot. Jordan Tyson's probably the closest to being like the most talented, high potential guy. People are worried about his injury history, but it doesn't seem like his injuries are related to each other. It seems like he has bad luck when it comes to injuries. But, you know, is there really a huge gap between what you think Mekhi Lemon can be in the NFL and what you think Casey Concepcion could be? Is there really a huge gap between what Jordan Tyson could be and what somebody like a Chris Bell could be or a Denzel Boston? I don't really think so. Like, I think the gap between the first class of wide receivers and the second group of wide receivers, not that big. I think the gap at tackle, pretty large. Like the difference between Francis Mauigoa and Monroe Freeling, and then like you get to Caden Proctor and Blake Miller and all those guys, and I like Blake Miller. If the Browns take him at 24, I will be encouraged about that. But there's a gap there, right? Whether it's because of where they played and what you have to project them to do, or the level of play that they produce, like a Caleb Lomu, right? That's gonna be a huge thing that you have to contend with. All I'm saying is, if the Browns take a tackle at 6, I'm not going to be throwing a temper tantrum. I'm not going to be out here doing the Tony Rizzo or whatever Tony Rizzo said he was going to do. I think taking a tackle at 6 makes sense. If the Browns take a wide receiver at 6, I'm not going to sit here and have a temper tantrum. I'm not going to be upset about it. I could understand them going wide receiver. I could understand them going tackle. I can understand them taking a defensive player at number 6, or a player who plays on offense who's not one of these positions we've been talking about. And the reason I can understand it is because the Browns have picked 24. The Browns have picked 39. And also, under Andrew Berry, the Cleveland Browns have not been tied to the idea of drafting for need, especially when they're not at the end of what they think is their rebuild period, right? The Browns are in the middle of their rebuild timeline right now. So drafting for need doesn't really make the most sense because they're not drafting to have the most impact in 2026. The Browns are drafting to make sure that they have the best outcome for over the next 5 years with a player, right? Like, it's not just about what they could do in year one. I think people get too fixated on what a prospect's going to bring a team in year one. In the grand scheme of things, what a prospect produces their rookie year is some of the most inconsequential stuff of their career. It's more about what that prospect produces in year 2, 3, 4, and 5 that really ends up making the difference. A lot of times people look at the draft and they can only think about how it's going to affect 2026, but that's not the mindset that the Cleveland Browns are in. The Cleveland Browns are not just thinking about 2026 when they're drafting a player number 6 overall, when they're drafting a player number 24 overall, when they're drafting a player number 39 overall. They're thinking about 2026. They're thinking about 2027. They're thinking about 2028. They're thinking about 2029 and 2030. A lot of the reason I think it's hard for people to grasp the Mason Graham pick last year at number 5, even though Mason Graham, I think, is ahead of schedule in his development, is because Mason Graham is probably going to make a lot more sense by the end of 2028 than he did make sense to people at the end of 2026, because that's a position that just takes a longer time to develop. And for me, when I look at the long-term issues with the Cleveland Browns, I think it's more important that they solve their problem at left tackle long-term if they can, if there's an opportunity there. And I think there is an opportunity for Cleveland to solve their problem at left tackle. If they can solve that problem at left tackle, they will be better off in the long term versus reaching for a wide receiver at 6. Because I think other draft classes are going to have similarly talented wide receivers in them. I don't think this is a year where the talent at wide receiver is so good you can't pass up on it. I think it's very possible next year you could be sitting with pick 14 and have access to the same level prospect at wide receiver. I think it's possible that you could draft somebody who could be the best wide receiver in this class in the second round of this draft or at pick 24. You know, I don't think this is a year where you have to have the top pick in the first swing to get the best wide receiver. Let's remember, right? Jerry Jeudy was in a loaded wide receiver class, and he was the first wide receiver taken, and that's something that's haunted his career, right? Just because somebody is the first wide receiver taken doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to be amazing, right? Sometimes the first guy or the guy that people are highest on pre-draft doesn't really work out at that position, and that seems to happen at wide receiver a lot more frequently than it happens at tackle. There are reasons for that. I did a whole video with JP talking about that, so if you want to go check that out, watch my last collab about the offensive line with JP Acosta. But that's kind of the reality, but that's where we are. I just want people to be open to a lot of different ways for the Browns to fix the offense. They could throw wide receiver at the problem. That might work. They could they could fix the offensive line. I think that has a better chance of working, right? If they get a left tackle, you give Quincy a fully invested offensive line to run behind, and you build the run game behind that. I think that has a better chance to fix the offense because now you have an identity to build off of, and that run game can make everything around it much better, much like the template was in 2020 with Nick Chubb, right? Where the Browns just invested in the offensive line, they put Nick Chubb behind that line, and then they profited, right? And then that helped the Browns' lackluster wide receiver room. It helped Baker Mayfield develop, right? The similar template could help Shador. It could help the offense. It could help wide receivers. It could help whoever you draft at 24 to play wide receiver or 39 to play wide receiver. It doesn't have to be done one way. Yeah, we get caught up sometimes in thinking that wide receivers and, skill players are the only way to improve on offense or add playmakers to the offense. But how many big runs would Quincy have broken off last year if he had a great offensive line in front of him? We saw the times where we're like, damn, if Quincy just had this guy here, that's 80 yards, it's 40 yards, it's another big run there, right? How many more chunk plays does Quincy have? How many more drives do the Browns sustain because they have a better offensive line? We haven't even talked about the pass protection element of this, right? But if the Browns have great wide receivers, but Shador can't get the ball off because he's constantly dealing with pressure coming from his blind side, well, then all of a sudden we're going to start to realize why the Browns should have got a left tackle. And this is the thing that cracks me up, right? I get criticized for wanting the Browns to take a offensive tackle at 6, and people are saying, I don't care about Shador, right? I don't want Shador to be successful. So that's why I don't want the Browns to take a wide receiver early. But if the Browns don't take a tackle at 6, and let's say they don't address the tackle position again, they throw DeJuan Jones out there. DeJuan Jones gets injured early, like he's gotten injured the last couple of years. And then we have KT Leviston out there playing left tackle, and Shador is dealing with constant pressure from his blind side. Those same exact folks who said I did not care about Shador are going to be mad about the Cleveland Browns not having a tackle solution in place because now that's impeding Shador's ability to play football. See, you can have all these shiny toys when it comes to wide receiver. You can have all the best wide receiver, but if you can't get the throw off, it does not matter. And that's what I'm talking about here. When in the world did we forget that a left tackle is a quarterback's best friend? He is the blindside protector for the quarterback. And somehow suggesting that the Cleveland Browns take a left tackle has now turned into something where it's anti-quarterback to suggest that the Browns draft a left tackle. Just because somebody wants the Browns to take a tackle at 6 does not mean that they don't care about wide receiver or they don't want to draft a wide receiver number 1. But also, just because the Browns take a tackle at 6, if that's what they do, if they take a tackle first, that also doesn't mean that they're just leaving Shador out there to draft. They're literally protecting Shador if he's the starting quarterback. They're protecting whoever that starting quarterback is, because that's what a left tackle's literal job is. We've gotten kind of ridiculous about this year's draft, right? Carnell Tate could help the quarterback position, but you know what else could help the quarterback position? Left tackle. You know what? And unlike Carnell Tate, right, where Carnell Tate's not really going to affect the run game that much, the left tackle is going to have a great impact on the run game, whether it's successful or not. There's more than one way to crack an egg here, right? I'm open to a lot of different ways it can go. But acting like left tackle does not help the offense is so unbelievably stupid. That's all I had to say. I had to get that one off my chest. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.